was one term that is both simultaneously overused yet minimally understood when it comes to film discourse, it is probably auteur. Literally translated from the French for author, an auteur is just that, an author, a person. The perceived weight given to the term, at least in this context, is that it is often attributed to a collaborative medium like filmmaking, between actors, set and costume designers, composers, editors, gaffers, audio engineers, and too many other roles to relay. A film is the product of many a person's effort, both obvious and not. So to be called an auteur in the world of filmmaking is to have a singularly perceptible presence, or a strong voice, in an environment created by dozens, if not hundreds. Out of many, one. The term is often, though not always, reserved for the director, usually relegating to that director's tendency to have distinctive styles or themes throughout their work. Notice how I said distinctive, and not good.
Talking to a plastic plant. I'm still doing it.
I did not hit her. I did not. Oh, hi, Mark.
Is this a cheap shot? You bet. But the point remains that you're not going to mistake either director's films for any other director working today. But how does this relate to anime, where being a director is a completely different animal? Because the industry is a completely different animal. There are certainly directors whose work you can instantly recognize. A shiver up a character's spine till their hair stands on end is the telltale sign of a Hayao Miyazaki film, and an unusual fascination of undulating wires and tubes is textbook Katsuhiro Otomo, or at the very least, Otomo inspired. But becoming an auteur in the anime industry is almost a byproduct of becoming a director in the anime industry. There's a sort of barrier to entry beyond the years spent going to school to learn the process of animation. You might enter it working in layout or as a background artist, but most of the time, it's as a glorified delivery boy.
The job of a production administrator is to organize and administrate the full length of the production process. That means I pick up a lot of stuff and take it where it needs to go.
It's then you might be tapped for director after spending some odd years putting in the time. Not to say that film directors immediately get jobs as directors right out of film school, it's that their time spent paying their dues isn't spent on learning other facets of filmmaking. Because of unions and other politicking surrounding the filmmaking industry, one doesn't just float around from job to job outside of being an assistant. The entire process is very compartmentalized, and thus specialization occurs within this ecosystem. While the director might have the final say as to creative decisions, ultimately it is up to the technicians themselves to actually execute these decisions. The anime industry is comparatively more free-form, and because of this, any would-be director has to have more hands-on experience as to what goes into producing an anime. Thus, it strengthens their creative voice. This leaves quite a few directors doing more than directing the actors' performances, often going further into storyboarding, writing, and even doing the actual animating themselves. They're veritable jack-of-all-trades, which is the perfect environment for producing quote-unquote auteurs. And yet this still doesn't account for probably the strongest reason why anime directors keep falling into the auteur namesake. And it's for the same reason why you and I watch anime in the first place. Because it's drawn. Anime can't help but be a veritable signature by virtue of its own existence. It's animation based on art that must be derived from a source. Now, that source might be from the original manga artist, or a bespoke character designer, or from the director. And so, Osamu Tezuka's anime looks like Tezuka's, Mamoru Hosoda's anime looks like Hosoda's, and Masami Obari's anime...
That's right. The dice have been thrown, my friend.
You get the point. It's no wonder that the viewer can form such a strong attachment to the director of an anime, when it feels like their fingerprints are all over it. But when a director makes a film that has his unmistakable touch, and is also about his own relationship to his art, the film itself can't help but be... personal. Based on the 1993 book of the same name by author Yasutaka Tsutsui, Paprika is a 2006 film directed by beloved animator Satoshi Kon. It was a passion project of sorts for both Tsutsui and Kon, the author having wanted a film adaptation for over a decade, and Kon being a fan of the novel.
当然これはお金がかかるだろうなとは思っていましたけれどもね、もうできるものと思っていたんで。
これは運命に違いないみたいなことを勝手に
At the time of its release, Paprika was rightly hailed as a milestone in anime history, and while I believe that still holds true today, I also believe that time has revealed a side of the film that has gone unnoticed. But first, the details. In an unspecified future, dreams are not just fanciful flights of whimsy, but a source of help for troubled minds and intrepid souls. With the advent of a near-miraculous piece of technology, the DC Mini, people have the ability to dive into each other's dreams with the hope that they might discern what their subconscious is trying to tell them, and therefore guide them toward mental well-being.
Anxiety neurosis.
You think this case could be causing it?
We don't want to jump to conclusions. The therapy's just getting started.
The fairy woman that guides these souls through troubled waters is Dr. Atsuko Chiba, who adopts a new identity while diving into the dreams of others named, well...
It's a bit bland, needs a little spice. Perhaps a pinch of paprika?
This alter ego exists as a comforting balm. She is mirthful, playful, caring, and insightful. She is a literal manic pixie dream girl for the seemingly only male clients to help exhume their deepest buried regrets and sources of pain. And she is everything that Dr. Chiba isn't.
You should monitor your food consumption.
I can't fight on an empty stomach.
What fight?
One can't help but feel that Paprika exists not just for the benefit of Dr. Chiba's clients, but that's also followed by the feeling that we've heard this setup somewhere else before. Might as well address the elephant horn in the room post-haste. Yes, Inception bears more than just a slight similarity to Paprika, which was released 4 years prior. Though in the case of Inception, the dream machine, as it were, was developed not to treat psychiatric trauma, but to train soldiers somehow? Look, I haven't seen Inception in nearly a decade, and oh my god, Inception was released nearly a decade ago. Why does everything have to make me feel old?
1, you're not even 30 yet. And 2, you make your living by talking about old anime. You're like a pig that rolls around in mud and then complains about being dirty. And not in the fun way either.
But yeah, there's way too many similarities for it to just be a coincidence. From plot details, characters, even the way certain scenes were shot feel like they were lifted entirely from the anime. Though it is important to note that director Christopher Nolan has never gone on the record to say he was inspired by the film. Though after the way many critics have drawn these comparisons, I'm not surprised to hear that, unless Nolan wants to ostensibly confess to artistic theft. Besides, aren't there other directors who have more to answer for more blatant acts? Also, this wouldn't be the first time that Cohn's films have been homaged. Seriously, Aronofsky is the biggest Cohn stan working in Hollywood today. These are practically the same story. From the outset, it doesn't feel like Paprika has much in the way of plot, or at least one that feels like it has some immediacy to it. And you're kind of right. There are two mysteries at play here that form a dual backbone to the structure of the story. Who is the one that has stolen a DC Mini and is using it to infiltrate the dreams of others and drive them insane? And what is haunting the dreams of one of Dr. Chiba's clients, Detective Konakawa? The first mystery is, honestly, the most uninteresting part of the film. It gives the story stakes and a threat, but not much else. It's quite telling that the theft of the device happens off-screen, and the results of the theft, while obvious...
No one gets in the way of my glory train! They need to really analyze all the livers of the Triangle Goose Party!
Still feels like it's all happening on shaky story ground.
Ah, must have been around 7:30 when I passed by. As fate would have it, I just happened to see you disappear into that big cup of instant noodles.
There's quite a lot of exposition as to how the thief is able to infect the minds of those closest to the project, but as the plot continues and the threat grows larger and larger, the suspension of disbelief becomes more and more strained, and you wind up starved for answers. Ironic, since the film feels it was necessary to halt what was going on to catch everyone up at the beginning. Most of the heavy lifting in these expository scenes is done by the DC Mini's inventor, Dr. Tokita.
He was in the middle of treating a patient with the therapy machine
when he activated the DC Mini, which caused his patient's dream to be subliminally projected into his subconscious.
And while a lot of what he is saying is rooted in kernels of actual science, what it basically comes down to is a wizard did it. I'll admit that the film is noble in its attempts to ground the intentionally surreal story in a foundation of hard science fiction, as was the intent of the author Tsutsui when he wrote the book.
私の、得意な精神分析学の知識を生かしたもので、こういうロマンをね、やりたかったんだけれども。
But the film encumbers itself while getting bogged down in the details. It just winds up feeling frustrating that so much is going into the why of things, while simultaneously not giving enough as to explain fully the why of things, at least not in a satisfactory manner. Eventually, you just kind of have to throw your hands in the air and say to yourself, well, I guess this is happening now. This being an infection of the entire world by a collective dream which is driving the human population to madness.
We want to make sure it preserves its memory forever!
If there's no flower, there'll never be fruit!
Again, Wizard did it. The weakness of the main plot is laid bare at the viewer's feet by the end when the thief reveals himself and the reason for his theft and actions. Not to go too hard into spoiler territory or anything, but when the film has been a visually arresting, eye-watering head trip of imaginative animation, and the motivation for all of this is that now the universe is his to command, to control, kind of a letdown. As a story, the main plotline's mystery is unsurprising, but that's the byproduct of being utility-minded. It's mainly there to be used to shepherd the fantastically realized visuals from scene to scene, not so much to enrapture an audience's attention. In that way, it does just enough to form a foundation to give context and structure to what would otherwise be free-form experimental cinema.
The Sphinx look really doesn't suit you, my dear.
Sometimes. Kohn would admit that making the film gave him a chance to let his creative id run free, what he would call his hoodlum Kohn.
で、今回そのチンピラで行こうっていうのは今まではそういうなんかこうこれ見よがしなテクニックみたいなものは、あんまり出しちゃいけないと。かっこ悪いからと思ってたんですけど、思いついたことを今回やろうと。
So in that way, it's no wonder that Paprika feels like a veritable blank canvas for Kohn and his staff to let their colors fly. But the plot is still window dressing, and every time the film has to go back and rein it in to remind everyone why the characters are suddenly changing form or why they can suddenly fly or make less than subtle nods to pop culture, it's a veritable damn squib. Likewise, Dr. Chiba's arc feels incomplete by the movie's end. Like, in order for us to get to that resolution, we had to take a few warp pipes, as it were.
You've convinced yourself that you've been granted the power to control everyone around you. You're like old Baldy in a pair of high heels.
Because the story is focused on the heist and the subsequent misuse of the DC Mini, we don't necessarily get a strong sense of what motivates Dr. Chiba to change over the course of the movie, or that she even should change. We get that she's distant and prone to being clinical, but it was never shown to be a character flaw or something of hers that she struggles with. So when Paprika starts talking to her about her feelings for Dr. Tokita, it just comes out of nowhere.
I can't just leave Tokita behind. I can't because
You can say it, because why?
You might point to the fact that Paprika herself exists as a barrier to keep Dr. Chiba at a professional distance from those she helps, but again, if it's not portrayed in any light, be it negative or positive, then what can be expected of it other than a neat little factoid about her?
I'll swallow anything edible put in front of me.
I know. You're so open to everything, that's why you're so much fun.
You never get the sense that despite being arguably the titular character, that it's really her movie. More time is spent on the struggles of Dr. Tokita and his immaturity than anything else about her, and it's not even his movie either.
Morals and responsibilities. That adult baggage isn't my thing.
And that's because it's not their movie. It's Detective Konakawa's movie.
Could be it's somebody a lot like you, I guess.
Somebody a lot like me?
Possibly there's another you, younger.
Or should I say it's Satoshi Kon's movie. When you replay the entire movie back, you notice that Detective Konakawa's presence really doesn't fit in the overall story of the DC Mini and the crisis revolving around it. And that's probably because he wasn't in the original novel. It was Satoshi Kon himself who wrote him into the film, and breaking down his story, with the knowledge that we have of Satoshi Kon and his life at the time, it paints a very sad picture in hindsight. Spoilers from here on out.
You're very familiar with movies, aren't you? It's my understanding that you made your own a few years back.
Yes, I sure did.
We learned that Konakawa was an aspiring director in his youth, and that he tried to make a movie with a friend who had tragically died of a sudden illness, leaving it incomplete. His anxiety and fears are rooted in what is left unfinished, all the while he's being haunted by the memories of his friend. And only by finishing his dream does he even realize this, and realize that there is yet another dream to finish.
But what about the rest of it?
Hey, wait!
To say that Detective Konakawa is Satoshi Kon does seem pretty obvious, so why in the world did we all miss this? I mean, beyond the fact that Konakawa is an invention of the film, his past is directly tied to being a director, down to the fact that he breaks down film terminology while cosplaying as Akira Kurosawa.
And what is pan focus?
Well, it's an ability of the camera to create a large depth of field by reducing the aperture so that medium and long-range shots are in focus.
But, as obvious as it is, it doesn't make the fact any less poignant or important or, in this case, prophetically tragic. On August 24th, 2010, Satoshi Kon passed away from complications arising from pancreatic cancer at the age of 46. According to his final words, posted by his family to his blog upon his death, he recounts learning of the diagnosis in May of 2010, and spending the last few months of his life in and out of hospitals telling his loved ones how much they mean to him and how happy they made him. He had very few regrets, but one of them, as he recounted, was that he would depart this world without finishing the film he was working on, Dreaming Machine. He worried that the storyboards that he worked on with Madhouse would never be realized or seen, and confided in his producer Masao Maruyama these fears. Maruyama only told him, "Don't worry. We'll figure out something, so don't worry." He ends the letter by saying "Osaki ni," which is the informal way of saying farewell while being sorry for leaving before you. It's downright eerie that Kon would eventually live out the fate that he wrote into Paprika, and if it wasn't for the fact that he only learned about the diagnosis after the film was made, I could have sworn that he wrote it that way. But maybe he did. He, like the rest of us, wasn't to know his fate beforehand, but I think that death was always at the back of his mind. In his last words, he mentioned that he used to think, "I can't help it if I die any day." And if you know anything about the anime industry, you can understand why he would think like that, as the stress and crunch of production that making an anime entails has taken its toll on too many to count, a product of both the reality of making an anime as well as societal pressure to work for work's sake. It's as if dying at the desk is its own reward. As for Kon, you can plainly see him chain-smoking and spending long nights at his office, immersed in his work on Paprika.
はい、仕事しますよ。音を取ったら次は絵の仕事と。全部揃ってからやってみたいんですけどね。はい。
One of the more heartbreaking moments in his final words on his blog was when he thanked his wife for understanding his need to work for as long as he did and for as hard as he did. Because it made him happy. It's hard not to see Konakawa's struggle as Kon's struggle with his own mortality in his art. Only in the film, Kon's fear is placed outside of his analogous character in the faceless and nameless friend of Konakawa. It's also worth noting that in a subtle bit that's missed entirely if you put on the dub, the bartenders in Konakawa's dreamscape that talk to him when Paprika cannot are played by Auteur Tsutsui and Kon himself. But the real heart of my reading of Paprika comes from how Konakawa dealt with these feelings of loss and how they dictated his life. His recurring nightmare of him killing himself over and over again is the fear that since his friend died, their dream died with him, to the point that he subconsciously wanted to keep the dream alive, becoming a detective just like the part he played in their film.
A reality created from fiction. Always remember that.
Yeah. Reality and fiction.
That single line strikes to the very core of the matter, that truth came from fiction for the need to finish a dream. But for Kon, his dream was left unfinished. Another truth that came from fiction. As was mentioned before, Kon was working on another film, Dreaming Machine, at the time he became ill. And while producer Maruyama assured Kon that they will think of something, it has been stuck in development hell for the past 9 years. Shots have been animated, but funds were an issue, with Maruyama claiming that despite those setbacks, he hoped to have the finished film within 5 years of his passing. But as 2015 ended and 2016 began, Maruyama seemed to have a different opinion. For 4 to 5 years, I kept searching for a suitable director to complete Kon's work. Before his death, the storyboard and script, even part of the keyframe film, was already completed. Then I thought, even if someone can mimic Kon's work, it would still be clear that it's only an imitation. Dreaming Machine should be Kon's movie, him and only him, not someone else's. That means we cannot and should not compromise only to finish it. I spent years to finally reach this hard conclusion. He went on to say that another director should take Kon's concept and make their own film from it, so that way it could be theirs. And you know what? I can see where he's coming from. In a way, Kon himself built his filmography in much the same way. Paprika, Perfect Blue, and Tokyo Godfathers were all based, some looser than others, on novels, on concepts that weren't his. Shouldn't another director have the chance to do the same? I see no reason why not. But this brings me back to what I originally said about film. It's a collaborative medium. As much as anime can give a director more control and a more distinctive voice and give more credence to the term auteur, it's still the sum of the effort of many. Kon opined that Dreaming Machine would probably go unfinished because he, quote, put his arms around the original story, the script, the characters and the settings, the sketches, the music, every single image. But in that same breath, he also notes that it was not him alone that put blood, sweat, and tears into making it. It was him and his staff at Madhouse. From artists to actors, from engineers to composers, it was a dream shared by many. Whether they start all over again or push forward and salvage what they have, it can't change the fact that in order for this dream to finish, it requires the effort and drive of more than just one man, as talented and as sorely missed as he is.
楽器のスタッフ、音響スタッフ、まあでもスペシャリストじゃないね、そういう制作みたいなそのポジションまで含めて。
The dream needs to be finished. If for nothing else, than to once again bring truth from fiction. Relieved by the day having been saved and coming to peace with his past, Paprika ends with Konakawa walking to the cinema, passing by the marquee bearing advertisements for Perfect Blue, Millennium Actress, and Tokyo Godfathers, and he buys a ticket for a new movie, Dreaming Kids. Only time will tell if Dreaming Machine will ever become a reality. But dreams, they have a funny way of living on. In the meantime, I hear an old friend of the show has been making headlines recently. And it has been a while since we checked in on our old pal Atomo, hasn't it? Till next time.